Just to confirm, you're able to see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar about data lifecycle and records management. My name is Rahul Srivastava. I'm part of the data lifecycle management product team. I also have product managers in my team joining this call. Right. So today we are going to talk about data lifecycle management or DLM and records management RM products from Purview. So the agenda for this webinar is we are going to provide an introduction about DLM RM. Then we are going to dive into the business drivers for DLM RM. Thirdly, we'll look at some use cases. These use cases are from private and public sector. And then we'll dive into the released feature list that DLM has done for the last year, and then we'll talk about some upcoming items, right? As has been mentioned, please ask questions in the chat. There are product managers who are going to actually answer those questions. We are joined by the DLM product and customer experience team who will answer questions. All right, so let's get started. So let's talk about what is data lifecycle management, right? So it's an intelligent and built-in information and records management solution. The primary purpose that DLM RM serves is governing your data. And you govern your data primarily by automatically retaining and deleting data that is residing in your M365 apps and services, right? Now, this data could include emails, documents, chats, viewer engaged posts, etc. And there is a net new addition to this, which is Copilot interactions. Now, as new services and apps are added to M365, we keep extending DLM capabilities to these new apps and services. Now, there are two distinct capabilities that the product provides. The first is data lifecycle management, which is to manage risk and liability by keeping only what you need and deleting everything that you don't across your entire digital estate. If you want to delete all files that have not been modified, let's say for the last 5 years, you can actually use data lifecycle management to get rid of such data. The next aspect that we are going to look at for this product is called records management. Now, records management helps you meet your legal, business, regulatory requirements related to your M365 data. For example, if a regulation asks you to retain all patents, contracts, financial reports in your company for 7 years and get prior approval before that data is disposed, this is where the records management solution is going to help out. All right. So now let's jump to, with this introduction about data lifecycle management product, let's jump to first exactly what are the key business drivers. All right. So let's jump to the key business drivers for DLM RM. Now this is from the perspective of our customers. So normally you would need data lifecycle management, records management, several scenarios. So some of these scenarios are listed here. I have 3 of them. The first one is data lifecycle optimization for AI. Now, with the advent of Copilot, there's a lot of data that is being generated using Copilot interactions, right? So if you're setting up Copilot in your org, then DLM will help you prepare your tenant data for Copilot consumption by getting rid of old data. So this is part of the rot data, redundant, obsolete, and trivial, saying that deleting obsolete data will help you get more accurate results for Copilot. It will also help clean up Copilot interactions in case you don't want Copilot data to stick around for too long, right? So you can manage the life cycle of Copilot and prompts and responses that has been used by the end users. The second business driver for DLM RM is around data security and storage costs. So if you're worried that your tenant is less secure because there is just too much data, and the more data that you have, the broader or larger attack vectors you have, then DLM can help reduce that footprint, right? An example of this could be like if you have ransomware attacks where data is encrypted, getting rid of old data will basically help you prevent that. Old data also leads to cases where you're just paying more to store data that is not useful to you. In that case, you can reduce your storage bills by regularly getting rid of data that is not useful to your enterprise anymore. Now, the last one that we are going to talk about are regulatory laws. This is another important cornerstone for using DLM RM, where you have these regulatory requirements around data retention and deletion. Now, these could be financial regulations, which require you to store financial records for audit purposes or maintain immutability of those records. There could be government regulations that might mandate requirements on how to store government records, such as census data, contracts, etc. And with the advent of AI, as we talked about, a lot of countries are formulating regulations to govern the use of AI. Among other things, these regulations define how long should AI data be kept in the enterprise. So for all these use cases from companies, uh, they use data lifecycle management and records management to manage their data. So now with these business drivers, let's just quickly talk about the various use cases, some example use cases where this could be useful, right? So some industries that we have looked at are pharma and banking. Now, pharma and banking are heavily regulated industries. As a result, they need to retain data based on certain events that happen. An example, this could be, let's say the loan tenure is ending or a clinical trial is ending. In that case, there is a feature in DLM RM called event-based retention. You can basically trigger events, and when you trigger an event, the corresponding retention flow that you want uh, are triggered based on this, right? So this basically helps you manage, retain or delete data based on some events that are happening within your organization. There could also be vast amounts of sensitive data that requires special handling in these industries. So DLM provides the capability to identify sensitive data and apply specific retention to it. Also, if there are immutability requirements on the data, these data can be declared as regulatory records to prevent any changes and maintain the integrity of the data. Lastly, both industries have large amounts of data that needs to be properly disposed. That is, it need not be automatically deleted. It probably requires a reviewer to look at this data, who decides whether this data needs to be deleted or needs to be kept for a longer period of time. We have a feature called disposition reviews in RM, which enables companies to run disposition review process that requires an authorized reviewer to sign off on the disposition before the data is discarded. This way, anything important that you have is not lost. If you look at the government sector, the public sector, similar requirements basically show up, right? So it could be sensitive documents such as information about citizens, security documents, etc., can be identified and able to keep to limit changes to such documents and maintain data integrity. It could also be that government has a lot of departments, and you might want to apply different attention to different departments. In that case, we have features like admin units, which will allow you to divide your tenant into different departments or different admin units, and then you can basically apply specific retention policies for those admin units. Last but not the least, disposing old data again, such as sensors or stale data, can be done with oversight by using disposition reviews. Again, a reviewer is required in the middle before the disposition happens, right? So as you can see, for all regulatory requirements, for sensitive data, for disposing securely, a lot of private and public sector, both private and public sector actually requires some of these capabilities, and that is something that is present in data lifecycle management. So now let's quickly, so now at this point, I would basically just pause and I would like to take a quick poll with the audience around, can you basically type in the chat about what do you use currently to meet these requirements? So if these requirements are applicable to you, then what do you currently use to do this? So I'll wait for 15 seconds. People can basically put in their responses and then we'll continue.
Rahul, there's actually a delay for the live stream, so people will probably answer in the next couple minutes, but there is a small delay. Yeah.
All right. So I'll just continue so that people can keep typing their answers and we can look at them later. So now that we have talked about what DLM RM is and what are the different use cases for which DLM RM capabilities are used, I just wanted to quickly give a glance for people who are not familiar with DLM RM, what sort of capabilities uh, do we present. So these are the DLM capabilities at a glance. We support Exchange, SharePoint, Teams, UI, Engage, Copilot, anything across your M365 real estate. We have retention policies for broad retention. These are container level retention, like applying policies to a full mailbox or to a SharePoint site, right? And if you want to do exceptions, like you want for sensitive data, let's say you want longer retention, then you can use labels, right? And in addition to these two, there are premium features that we also support, such as adaptive scopes, disposition reviews, power automate integration, which basically help you meet any specialized requirements that you might have. So these are the capabilities that data lifecycle management has. Now, what we are going to talk about is what are the different releases or recent changes that we have done in data lifecycle and records management. So we'll talk about those features in the next slides. Okay, so this is basically a release summary for all the work that we have released in data lifecycle management and records management. You can broadly split them into three categories. We'll talk about all of these, so you don't need to read through. But we have looked at more retention labeling and policy options. We have improved the user experience. And then there are some core record management requirements that are there that we have implemented. So off to the first one. So this is the crown jewel of data lifecycle management. Currently, Copilot is becoming ever pervasive. So there is a need for there is now a need for companies to basically start retaining Copilot interactions. So this feature that we released, which is generally available, allows you to retain and delete Copilot interactions, apply policies to those, right? So what admins can do is they can manage retention and deletion policies for prompts and responses that are sent and received when interacting with Microsoft Copilot. So if you have Copilot in your org and you need to define how long Copilot interactions need to be kept, you can now define a policy to do that. Now, this capability today is paired with Teams chats. So when you basically will see a demo, when you try to configure it, the same retention that applies to Teams chats applies to Copilot interactions also. In addition to this, the standard retention triggers are available for this. You can define how long the interactions need to be stored and what to do when the retention period ends. An option could be you can retain it forever, or another option you can just delete the data once the retention period is over. So now what I'll do is I'll show you a small video of how Copilot, a retention policy for Copilot can be set up. So, okay, this is just going fast. Okay, so what you need to do is you need to go to the Microsoft Purview portal. In the portal, you will on the left nav see a lot of solutions. One of them is data lifecycle management. You need to click on the data lifecycle management tab. You will end up with this screen, which shows overview, retention policy, and a bunch of those features. You need to click on retention policies. And when you click on retention policies, you need to create a new retention policy. And this will basically help you create a Copilot policy as well. So here you're providing a name, For the policy, you can skip the admin units. You can say, I want to do a static configuration. Now, when you look at this, you will see an option here which says Teams, chats, and Copilot interactions. I'll just go back because it went back by too quickly. So you see this option called Teams, chats, and Copilot interactions. You need to select this. Once you basically configure this one, it will apply the retention policies to the Copilot interactions. Right. Sorry about that. For some reason, it just skipped over. All right. So you select this. You configure the policy. You can say what is the time limit. You can select a custom thing. You can choose when it's created. You can do next and submit. And voila, you have a Copilot policy that has been created, which is going to apply. In this case, this policy is just going to apply to everyone in the organization. So if they interact with a Copilot going forward, all Copilot interactions are just going to be covered by this policy. And any retroactive, like retrospectively also this applies, which means anything that was done before also gets covered by this. All right. So now with this, I have another question for the audience, which is with Copilot getting deployed so broadly in companies, do you know that DLM can be used to prepare for Copilot deployment by getting rid of obsolete data? Please answer yes or no. And if you want to also talk about exactly how you are using that, you're welcome to do that. So please type in your answers while I move forward to the next feature. All right. So this is a new capability that we have released recently. So people who are familiar with retention labels, they know that the retention period today on labels can be set only for created, modified, and it can be based on events such as someone leaves an organization, then kick off a retention period, right? Now, if you won't, so this does not cover the scenario where if you don't want the data to be deleted immediately, but give some bake time after which the data is deleted. Let's say you want all data to be retained for, let's say, 1 year and then deleted. Then when label is your friend, you can set retention based on when the item is labeled. That allows content to be kept for a minimum retention period. Now, this capability was not present in the DLM RM retention labels. This was a capability that was present in the old MRM labels. And now that we have introduced this capability here, this is consistent with the other retention label types that are supported in the M365 ecosystem. For you to use this, when you create a retention label, you can see in the screen that you can define the retention period, and the retention period, when you select the trigger for when the retention period needs to start, you will see an option which says when items were labeled, and this allows you to actually use this when labeled capability. All right. So, all right. So this is the next demo. So this specific feature is about scoping the records management responsibilities to specific admins. The context here is that for large organizations that are spread across multiple geos or departments, sometimes you need to split responsibilities by region or department. For example, you want to enable US admins to manage retention for, let's say, US users in your company, and German admins to do the same for German users. Now that capability did not exist in DLM RM before. All policies were global, and all admins who had access to the records management role group, they could go ahead and set up policies for all users in the organization, right? And that is something that sometimes you won't want, because retention policies could differ based on the countries or based on departments. So what you can do today is you can use a feature called administrative unit that allows you to do this. You can define an administrative unit in the example that I quoted, you can define an administrative unit for US users only. Then you can go to the role management section in Purview. You can go to the records management role group, and then you can choose the user or the for which you want to apply the records management role group. And then in that, you can pick an admin unit and say that restrict this records management responsibility to this specific admin unit. What this means is that now the admin can define retention only for US users and can only see their policies and not the policies for other geos or departments. Right now, admin units also pairs with adaptive scopes. So if you want to further subdivide admin units into smaller chunks, you can do that using adaptive scopes to set up adaptive policies. All right, so moving on to the next feature. So, so, so this is about support for static and adaptive policy scopes for top line retention labels targeting sits and exchange. Now, what this feature is that retention, if there is a feature called retention label, that retention label feature supports defining auto apply policies using SITs. Now, SITs stands for sensitive information types. An example of a sensitive information type is credit card or health credit card info or health records. Now, where this is applicable is that if you had a scenario where you wanted to apply retention label to sensitive information type, but you did not want to apply it tenant wide, right? You wanted to apply it only for a small group of users. It was not possible earlier. Previously, you could only target all exchange mailboxes in this case, right? So you could not include or exclude users, or you could not use adaptive scopes with this feature. Now, with this change, this is possible now. You can define a different set of retention labels for one set of users. Let's say your C-suite users, and another set of retention labels for another set of users. Let's say if they're working on a confidential project, and you can use both static and adaptive policy scopes for this. So this gives you a lot more flexibility in terms of how you set up your retention labels. All right. So now let's move on to the world of programmatic access to retention. So the next two features that I'm going to talk about, these are related to graph APIs. So what you can do is if you don't want to actually use the DLM capabilities that are there in the Purview portal because you have a certain niche use case that you want to enable. Now you can use graph APIs to manage retention labels on items in SharePoint and OneDrive, right? What this will allow you to do is this update allows you to apply and remove retention labels on items. It also allows you to get information about retention labels that are applied to items in SharePoint and OneDrive, and then lock and unlock records at scale, right? So if you have any custom flows that use graph APIs, now you can basically incorporate DLM capabilities also into that. In line with this, we also have Microsoft Graph APIs for data lifecycle management capabilities, right? So in this case, in this release, what we allow you to do is you can actually create and manage retention labels, events, and event types for event-based retention. So programmatically, now you're able to basically create uh, retention labels and event types. An example of where this could be used is that if you want to, let's say you have an HR system and a user leaves the organization and you want to, at that point of time for that event, trigger an event which is then going to invoke retention. Now you can do it programmatically from another HR system that you had, right? So previously you might have to do it manually by basically coming to the user interface in the Purview portal and doing that. Now you can do it programmatically. So it again helps you uh, customize your retention flows for your specific requirements. All right. So this is the third demo that I have. So this one is about the Power Automate integration that we have done and new actions. So the integration that we have done is that, let's say that you have a scenario where at the end of the retention period, you don't want to do disposition flow, or you don't want to reapply a label, but you want to do some custom flow of your own, right? In that case, what you can do is you can set up a Power Automate flow, and then you can link it back to the policies that you are, the retention label policies that you are setting up, and then invoke that uh, Power Automate flow at the end of the retention period, right? So this allows you a lot more flexibility with respect to what needs to be done at the end of the retention period. You can customize your disposition reviews. An example of this that we have come across are where instead of predefined approvers, what customers want are to dynamically select approvers. An example of a dynamically selected approver is, let's say if you are going to delete a file on a site, then you need the owner of the file to approve the disposition, or you want the site owner to approve the disposition. Both of those you can't do using the native DLM force, but you can use using Power Automate, right? What is also available is that now these DLM actions are available within Power Automate flows. So you can actually, let's say, apply a label using a flow and perform a synchronous action for compliant deletes. So that is something that is available with this integration. And in this example, what you see is that the customer or someone who is setting up the Power Automate flow, they are using the custom delete, the compliant delete option by searching for it and then putting it in their flow, right? So you can invoke a flow from the Purview portal, or you can actually create a Power Automate flow and use DLM actions within that. So that is what this integration provides. All right. So this one is related to Microsoft Archive. So if you know about M365 Archive, what M365 Archive allows you to do is it allows you to store your data that is inactive or aging into a colder data storage tier, so that it is more cost effective for you to store, let's say, old data, which is still important but not as frequently accessed, right? So in that case, you could basically move it from a hot to a cold storage. DLM did not support M365 archive before, but now with this update, we are extending our retention policy and retention label capabilities to archive site content as well. So even if you archive a site, any retention or deletion policies that you have set up, they are going to continue to apply to that site. There are certain restrictions to this, though. This is documented uh, in the public documentation. Certain things that you could do in uh, in a SharePoint site that is active and not in cold storage, such as locking, unlocking records or accessing records and all that, cannot be done on an archive. Those are the limitations of the uh, archive feature itself. All right. So these two are the next two that I'm going to talk about are more like bugs. So this one is about enabling orphan SharePoint sites to be excluded. So the context here is that with with the modern group. So today when you set up retention policies, you can actually set up a retention policy for a group also. Now the group is a combination of an Exchange mailbox and a SharePoint site. Now if a retention policy is applied to a SharePoint site, uh, and an Exchange mailbox and the corresponding modern group is deleted, but the Exchange mailbox and SharePoint site are on hold due to the retention policy, the Exchange mailbox becomes an inactive mailbox. But what happens with the SharePoint site is that it still remains active because the hold is applied. Now, after deprecation of the compliance policy center, you can't basically fetch the site ID for such groups. So now with this rollout, what you can do is you can actually pick the site ID uh, for the SharePoint site that is still active, and then exclude it from the retention policy. So that will basically help you remove this site uh, from the retention policy, right? And it can basically be disposed of. All right. So the next one is again something that customers have basically reached out to about. So the specific issue here was that there were certain end users who are unable to delete document library folders that contain large amount of files that is under a retention policy, or folders that have been deleted may reappear for users who sync a document library offline using OneDrive for Business. Now with this update, what's going to happen is that the folders can be deleted, and when basically uh, and they will remain deleted post synchronization. So both issues 1 and 2 are fixed with this specific update. All right. So now we'll move on to something more exciting, something that is more futuristic in nature, and this is about our public roadmap for the next few months. So we have a lot of exciting features, capabilities that are actually coming up in the next few months. Some of them I'm going to talk about here. So these are either new capabilities or improvement on to existing features. All right. So let's talk about adaptive protection integration in this case, right? So adaptive protection is a feature in insider risk management. Insider risk management is another solution just like data lifecycle management in Purview. Insider risk management's job is to identify risky users in your organization so that you can basically flag them. They have a feature called adaptive protection. What adaptive protection allows you to do is it will basically allow you to monitor risky users and then assign them risk levels. This could be an elevated risk level or a moderate risk level. Now, that is what adaptive protection does. Now, the scenarios that data lifecycle management enables is, let's say there is a malicious user in an organization who is about to leave the company. Now, this user starts deleting data in bulk, right, to cause harm for the company. And if nothing is done till it is, if like you don't monitor such a user, this could result in major data loss for the company. Now, what adaptive protection with DLM will help you is when such a malicious user tries to actually delete data, it will help you preserve data from such malicious actions. So how does it do that? It does that by looking at all users who are marked risky by adaptive protection. And then as we realize that basically this user is risky and they've started deleting files, what this integration does is it will automatically start preserving files deleted by the user, right? So what that does is it will allow time for admins to determine whether the delete was valid or invalid. So if it's an invalid delete, that is, it was done by a malicious user, it gives the opportunity for the admins to go restore the files that are deleted from the PHL of the sites where the file was stored, right? Now, some things that can be done here is that if the delete was valid, you can just let the data go. If the delete was invalid, you can actually preserve the data and at some point of time, restore the data. This also, so this one right now applies to deleted emails and files based on the user's insider risk level. If the user is also deemed not risky going forward, then also the user is moved out of the risky user bucket, and then uh, the risk level is changed, and accordingly proactive like this integration will work and it will let the deletes go through. So this is the adaptive protection integration with data lifecycle management feature. The next one, which is high on the list of folks, is uh, bypassing legal holds and retention policies. So the scenario here is that let's say there is a user who has accidentally sent a confidential email to a much larger group than intended, right? Now, all these users are under retention and hence these emails cannot be deleted. Even if you physically delete these emails from the mailboxes, they're just going to end up being preserved, right? So this constitutes a data spillage incident, and for you to basically fix this data spillage incident, you need to search for these emails, and then you need to actually delete these emails. And even if they are under retention, they need to be deleted. So in this case, this feature will allow you to actually search for such emails and then delete these events, even though they are under retention. Now, we understand that this is like bypassing retention is a pretty big step. So to ensure that basically we safely delete the data and it's an authorized deletion, there are controls that are built into this feature. So examples of such controls are that for you to actually use this feature, you need a separate security role, right? So, and that can actually be assigned only by someone who has an organization management role in Purview. In addition to that, there is a mandatory approval step before disposing the data, and you need that mandatory step to go through. It can be an e-discovery administrator, it can be a records management administrator who is going to actually approve this disposition, right? So the data cannot be deleted directly, it needs approval. And in addition to that, anyone who sets up this priority cleanup uh, step, even after even if they have the security role and there are multiple approvals, there is a complete audit trail that is maintained, so that you can basically trace back as to who set up this process and executed it, right? So we have ensured that this is safe and authorized, and this helps address a very key requirement that a lot of customers had, where they wanted to actually bypass legal holds and retention policies. All right. So this next one is a big ask that has come from customers around Teams transcripts. So basically, uh, this is not a data lifecycle management feature. This is actually how transcripts are stored in uh, Teams today. So today, the way the transcripts are stored is that they basically, there is a copy that is there in Exchange, and then there is a copy in OneDrive for Business. Eventually, what is going to happen is that there's going to be only one copy that is going to stay in OneDrive for Business. There won't be an Exchange copy. So with this change, what will happen is that uh, all the data is going to be there in OneDrive for Business, and all the deletions that are going to happen on that copy of the data. There's not going to be an Exchange online version. All right. So this is the second last feature that I'm going to talk about today. So this is about record opening behavior improvement in Office client applications. What used to happen before is that previously, if you opened a logged record file in desktop clients like Word, Excel, or PowerPoint and try to edit and save it, what would end up happening is that you have opened the file, you are editing the file, and then when you try to save it, that is when an error pops up saying, hey, you can't edit this, right? With this change, what's going to happen is as soon as you open a file that is a locked record, it will open in a read-only mode, and it will not allow user edits, right? And there is a message that's going to be shown. That message will say that they cannot edit this file, right? So this brings the desktop clients at parity with online versions of these Office applications where this feature was already present. All right. And the last one that I want to talk about is the changes to SharePoint Record Center site feature. So there was an announcement in Jan of this year that we have started the deprecation process for SharePoint Record Center site feature. Record Center, for those who don't know, is a template that allows that is a SharePoint site template that has inbuilt record management capabilities. So now that we have DLM and RM, this is not really a requirement because we do in place retention and deletion. So with this change, what's going to happen is that the ability to create new record center sites is going to go away. Configuring files that need to be routed to the record center sites, that's going to go away. And then content organizer features will be deprecated. Existing record center sites and configuration will continue to work, but these will not be available for use with new configurations. The date for this is January 2025. So this helps us consolidate the retention and deletion capabilities to DLM RM and basically deprecate anything that is old. All right. And with that, I come to the end of this presentation, and this is time for Q&A.
Great, thanks so much.
Jason?
Yep. The team's been great with answering questions. We do have a few that I'd like to bring up. The first one is, what a retention
Hey, Jason,
rate...
should I stop presenting before we...
Oh, David will take over.
Thank you. Correct.
So the first question is there a way, for insider risk management, is there a way to apply malicious leaver policy to supplier users because we can't set up an HR connector for them?
That's an IRM feature. I'm not sure if Bharat is there on the call, but I'll have to get back on that one, Jason. I am not an expert on IRM, so I'll have to circle back on that.
No worries. Thank you. The next one is, would a retention label allow me to retain a file even after it gets deleted?
Yes, that's the intent. Even if the file is deleted, it's going to just end up in preservation hold library, and then it's going to be kept there till the retention period is over.
Great, thank you. The next one is, can a retention rule be set to auto delete if no sensitive information is detected, or is this a manual process?
Can retention rule be set to auto delete? Okay, I'll have to ask whether it's so if they're talking about sensitive data, then they're basically talking about label applications. So label applications can, like, one of the actions that can happen is you delete after the retention period is over. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, thank you. The next one is there any way to use sensitivity labels with retention policies and labels? Our deletion policies are based on the sensitivity labels users define on files. If not, what would be the recommended solution for these requirements?
That was a long one. Just can you please repeat that again?
Yeah. Is there any way to use sensitivity labels with retention policies and labels? If not, what would be the recommended solution for these requirements? It's the most recent one in the chat if you want to look.
Yeah, can I just okay, is there any way to use sensitivity labels with retention policies and labels? So sensitive labels are used in auto apply policies. So there are two ways. So okay, got it. So you can do sets. So if you set up an auto apply policy, then you can basically, there's an option to use sensitive information types. There's no option to basically use sensitivity labels, but you can set up equivalent retention labels for the sensitive information types that sensitivity labels had, right? Sensitive labels is a separate feature in Purview, right? So my suggestion would be that whatever that sensitivity label has, use the same configuration of the sensitive content for setting up an auto apply policy, configure the same sensitive label here, and then basically you can use that. That's the recommended solution from our end.
Great, thank you. The next one is, what are the chances that the Power Automate flow will still be authenticated and working by the time an item gets to the disposition timeframe?
Okay. Which one is this one? What are the chances the Power Automate is going to be
authenticated and working by the time an item gets to the disposition timeframe?
Got it. Okay. What are the chances the Power Automate flow will still be authenticated and working by the time item gets to the disposition time frame? Well, the Power Automate flow should remain authenticated. I think this has been answered by Aftab, right? So it should, like, I don't see any case where basically it will not be authenticated. Once it's authenticated, then it just works. There is nothing, there is no timeline to basically that authentication uh, expires. It just gets renewed.
Okay, great. Thank you. We do have a couple long ones that just came in. I don't know if you wanted to see. There's one from Akash. Is there any way to use sensitivity labels with? Oh wait, that
We
one's
just
already been
answered
asked.
this one, right?
Yeah. The other one is if we have an old retention policy defined that retains keep content forever, and we want to change this, do we just disable the policy? What will happen? It's by Ed.
Yeah, the retention is not going to basically apply if you basically remove the policy, right? So the data will be allowed to be deleted by users. So my such like I don't know basically what's the intent of doing this, right? Like you can create a new policy, then you can basically define new retention settings for that, and then disable the old policy. So this policy will basically come into effect.
Great, thank you.
But
And then go ahead.
having said that, right, the duration in which like there is a gap in which a policy applies, right? So yeah, but in this case, I don't think basically the data is going to be affected, right? Because the keep content forever is already there. Once you replace it with a new policy, the new policy will come into effect.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
And then the last question we've got is, if you have a contract requirement to keep contract A data for 5 years and contract B data for 7 years, how would you define a policy to manage it?
So you have contract A, which has a retention for which needs a retention 5 years, and a contract B for which you need retention for 7 years.
Yes.
I would probably use retention labels for that, right? So the way to use retention labels would be that there has to be a way for you to. So okay, so there are two ways to do it, right? One way to do it is using retention policies. The way I would do that using retention policies, assuming that you have all the files in, let's say, a small set of sites, is you can set up a retention policy and you can say that contract A is in site, all contract A documents are in site A, and then you just apply the retention policy on site A for 5 years. That works. Similarly for contract B, if it all those documents are in site B, or let's say site B1, B2, B3, but you know which those sites are, then you can apply a retention policy for 7 years for those sites, right? So that's one way to do it. Now, if there is a use case where you don't know where the contract A and the contract B documents are, but you know basically like you have a way to identify these documents using KQL, right? Then what you can do is you can actually you can set up a retention label for 5 years and for 7 years, and then you can define an auto apply policy. One is for identifying contract A documents and then applying the 5-year retention label. The other one is for identifying the contract B documents and then applying that retention label for 7 years. And that's the way to basically scale it. So if you have it as a single place, use retention policies. If it's distributed across the tenant, but you know a way for you to identify it, then use retention labels.
Great. That seems to be all the questions. So with that, I'd like to thank you, Rahul, for being our guest today and for sharing the great information with our community. Also, thank you to the Q&A team who helped us with answering the questions and providing the resourceful information. To all the listeners still on the line, if you're someone who wishes to aid in the protection of the world from cyber threats and desire to have a say in shaping our strategies, blueprints, and recommendations, then we invite you to become part of our security community. Together, we can make a global impact. So join us at aka.ms/security community. This is also where you'll be notified about the upcoming webinars, events, and other announcements. Also, please take a minute submitting your webinar feedback at aka.ms/security webinar feedback. For those of you who may have additional questions on the topic we just covered or other product related questions, please feel free to raise them on our Microsoft Tech Community discussion space at aka.ms/Azure Purview community. Thank you all for being part of our community and for joining us on these webinars. We hope to see you next time. Goodbye.